Hello and welcome to Towards a Circular Economy for Plastic Reuters Events webinar in partnership with SupplyShift. The circular economy holds the key to reduce plastic's impact on the planet. Yet, companies cannot meet their circular economy or materials reduction goals without considering the supply chain. Today, 4 leaders from Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Unilever, WWF, and SupplyShift will share their ideas on advancing a circular economy for plastics. Just a quick reminder before we start, please use the Q&A box below to ask your questions to our panelists. And now is my pleasure to hand over to Erin Hyatt, Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility at the Retail Industry Leaders Association, who will be leading today's discussion. Over to you, Erin.
Thank you so much to Reuters and SupplyShift for today's session. So hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you. As mentioned, my name is Erin Hyatt, and I'm Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility with the Retail Industry Leaders Association. RILA is the largest U.S. trade association for retailers who've earned leadership status by virtue of their sales volume, innovation, or aspiration. We convene decision makers to collaborate and gain from each other's experience, and through research and thought leadership, we propel developments that foster both economic growth and sustainability. So for RILA, I have the pleasure of leading our sustainability, ESG, diversity and inclusion, and responsible sourcing communities. But today I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. So our speakers are joining us from around the world, and we will have the pleasure of hearing from Jamie Barsimentov, who's COO and co-founder at SupplyShift, where he is the driving force behind connecting SupplyShift's supply chain transparency and responsibility software with its customers and partners, and ensuring successful outcomes and continuous improvement in supply chain operations. We'll also hear from Sander de Furt, who joins us with a mechanical engineering background and leads the New Plastics Economy Initiative at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which aims to bring together key stakeholders around the globe to rethink and redesign the future of plastics. We also have Sheila Bonini with us, who leads private sector engagement at WWF, overseeing a broad portfolio of corporate partnerships that support the organization's conservation mission. And WWF partners with more than 100 companies, including some of the world's leading corporations, to meet big conservation challenges with an equally big response. And finally, we'll hear from Marika Lindstrm, who's Vice President of Packaging Procurement globally at Unilever. Unilever's procurement strategy is procurement with purpose, focusing on value, sustainability, and growth. And central to that agenda is plastics reduction, better plastics, and new business models for more sustainable packaging. So today we'll be having a conversation about some of the persistent challenges business face in addressing plastics' environmental impact. We will explore the importance of collaboration, in particular with suppliers, and ideas for driving progress to include the role of technology. So to kick us off, I want to start by thanking our panelists for joining us and actually asking each of you to tell us in just a sentence or two, what viewpoint are you bringing to today's conversation? Sander, if you don't mind, I'd like to turn to you first.
Yeah, so at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, our mission is to accelerate the transition to a circular economy, and acknowledging that this requires system-level change, so not just some small tweaks to the current system, and therefore requires all actors in the system to work together. That's why over the past years, we've been bringing together businesses, governments, academia, investors, civil society, and others to really help mobilize this transition. And plastic is just one of the materials we chose to focus on as a demonstrator, demonstrating that this broader shift to a circular economy really is possible.
Great, thank you so much. Sheila, could you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Sheila Bonini. I'm the Senior Vice President of Private Sector Engagement at World Wildlife Fund. And World Wildlife Fund's mission is to help people and nature thrive. And we look to preserve biodiversity, halting the degradation of the environment and combating the climate crisis. We do this, we lead with science-based and local solutions to address some of the biggest challenges facing wildlife, our ecosystems like oceans, freshwater, and forests, and also the threats to those systems like food systems and climate change. And we take all of those into account as we think about environmental issues, and we call this a one planet perspective. And this is particularly relevant for plastics, because plastics touches so many of our ecosystems and has a climate impact. And we have to ensure that as we address plastics, we're taking all of those things into account and not focusing on a single issue, so that we don't end up having unwanted trade-offs. So what I love about plastics, though, is plastics is a challenge that there's a huge amount of momentum for, and we're starting to see consumers, investors, and stakeholders really engage. And so this is a great area to be in, to be looking at how we can solve this problem. Our mission here is really the transition to a circular economy, much like Ellen MacArthur Foundation.
Thank you so much. And Marika, I'd love to hear what viewpoint you're bringing to today as well.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Marika Lindstrm, and I'm heading packaging procurement at Unilever. And we want to drive plastic circular economy and waste-free world through the implementation of our 4 public goals that we want to accomplish by 2025. 100% recyclable plastic packaging, at least 25% post-consumer resin implementation in all our packaging, collecting and processing more plastic than we sell, and last but not least, 100,000 tons plastic reduction and 50% virgin plastic reduction. And we definitely need our supply partners to drive solutions for better, less, and no plastic that are affordable and scalable worldwide.
Thank you so much. And Jamie?
At SupplyShifts, we're a transparency company. We help companies engage with their suppliers and understand their performance across a range of issues, plastics being a very important one that several of our customers focus on. So, for any company to achieve the lofty goals like Marika was talking about, they need to understand if their suppliers have capacity, what they're actually producing. They need to be able to know who's leading and who's trailing. So SupplyShift is a platform where companies globally do that kind of work with their suppliers. Especially in plastic, it's become critical these days to have that kind of information to identify alternatives and know who's performing to expectations and can be on track to meet those goals.
Excellent. Thank you all. So now we know who we're going to hear from, and appreciate all of you for lending your expertise today. So Sander, I'd love to turn to you first. You mentioned that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation use these issues at a systems change level. Could you describe how you would say we are in the overall story of business in plastics?
Yeah, by now pretty much everyone is very much aware that our plastic system is broken. It's harming biodiversity, using finite resources, contributing to the climate crisis, and also resulting in billions of dollars of economic loss of valuable material lost to our economy every year. By now, also more and more stakeholders are understanding the type of solutions we need, realizing that we cannot simply recycle our way out of this, and that cleaning up, burning, or burying plastics does not really solve the issue at the source. We really need to more fundamentally transform towards a circular economy in which we eliminate the plastics that we don't need, innovate the plastics that we do need to make sure they're all reusable, recyclable, or compostable, and then circulate all these plastics that we use in our economy and to keep them out of the environment. And through voluntary agreements like our global commitment, our network of plastic pacts around the world, we've now seen more than 1,000 organizations getting behind this one common vision of a circular economy, as well as ambitious 2025 goals to help realize that vision. And some of the leaders have also started to make real progress, in particular in certain areas like increasing recycled content. But at the same time, we'll need to see a further substantial increase in the pace and scale of efforts if we really want to solve this crisis. And there's 2 things I'd like to call out in particular. I mean, first of all, we need to see businesses massively step up their efforts on upstream solutions that go beyond recycling, solutions that reduce the need for single-use packaging in the first place. Current efforts are too exclusively focused on recycling only, which is part of the solution, but not the entire solution. So we need to see businesses put way more investments, innovation, and ambition level also in the other parts of the solution around elimination and reuse models. And to support them in doing so, we've published an upstream innovation guide quite recently, a couple of months ago, to really help them and inspire them to rethink not just packaging, but also the products themselves and the business models that sit around them. And the second point is that will be very crucial to see all these voluntary commitments and action be complemented with policy, because we need all stakeholders to act and not just the leading ones who are stepping forward voluntarily. And that's policy at different levels, national and local level policy. For example, extended producer responsibility policies is now very widely recognized as the only proven way to make recycling economics work for packaging. It's recognized by many stakeholders, including many of the largest industry players. But beyond national and local policy, also international policy will be crucial. And that's why we, together with WWF, major businesses like Unilever and others, financial institutions, as well as civil society and leading governments, are all calling or urging UN member states to start negotiating a global treaty on plastics, similar to, for example, the Paris Agreement that we have on climate. So I think overall, progress has been unprecedented if you look kind of from a historical perspective, but if you look forward, it's yet still kind of quite far from reaching the scale it needs to match the scale of the problem.
That's very helpful. So Sheila, Sander mentioned this, you spoke to it a little bit in your opening comments as well. How does WWF think about these challenges at both a global and a country specific level?
Great. I mean, I think, first of all, I agree with many of the things that Sander said. I do think, particularly, he mentioned that we can't recycle our way out of the problem, and that's something that I say all the time. And we need this focus upstream. We've been doing a lot of work around reuse. Together with WEF, we're going to be coming out with the reuse principles. And I think that's going to be a really important piece of the puzzle. I think a lot of companies are working on reuse. I think we'd like to see more examples where they're doing it in ways that are pre-competitive, that can really change kind of a whole sector. And I think it's not unprecedented when you look at the beverage industry and fountain drinks. That's an area that's reuse, and it's an area where there's collaboration across the board. So I do think that looking upstream, looking at those innovations, as Sander said, so I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle. I think the other is I can't say more about how we can't just accept business as usual. A recent Pew Charitable Trust study found that we're going to be generating twice the amount of plastics by the year 2040. And in turn, this will triple the amount of plastics leaking out into nature, which is really what we're trying to prevent. And we'll end up with, 4 times as much flowing into our oceans. So we really need to act fast. I think that's the other piece of the puzzle. And we need to change course all along the value chain. And again, we're very aligned with Ellen MacArthur Foundation in terms of what we need to do. We need to be eliminating unnecessary plastic and decrease the total volume. And then with those plastics we need to shift to more sustainable sources. So whether that's recycled material or responsibly sourced bio-based content, we need to decouple from fossil fuels that are going into virgin plastics. And we need to, of course, build this circular system with reuse, recycling, and composting the plastics that we use so that it all stays in the system. I think the way we think about it in WWF is that every time we have to go to the planet and take materials out, we want to keep them out as long as possible, cycling in the system before we have to go back and ask the planet for more. Because we're using already of all of our materials, we're consuming 1.6 times the Earth's ability to regenerate. And the Earth is very good at regenerating materials, but just not that fast. So we've got to break this unhealthy cycle. We approach it in 3 ways. We look at private sector action, we look at government policy, and we look at public engagement, and they're all intertwined. So I think policy, as Sander was talking about, is really key. We have to be able to drive towards these mandatory mechanisms to level the playing field. Today, it is not economic to use recycled content because we have these mixed up economic signals for a whole slew of reasons. And EPR plays, extended producer responsibility can play a really, really important role in breaking those negative loops, if you will. Sander talked about our work together on the global treaty. We do need an international framework to be successful for large scale actions. And even though we're just seeing significant movement on this issue, doubling of voluntary initiatives, it's just not enough. And that plastic pollution is continuing to grow, as I said. So we see a global treaty on marine plastic pollution as a critical framework for driving forward the kind of systems change that we need to see to begin to solve the plastic pollution problem. Because it can't be solved just one country by one country. It's going too slow. We need to have something like that Paris Agreement that really mobilize people to take action. So the goal of the treaty would be to harmonize the government's approach, both in terms of action and reporting on the issue, and create the resources needed to support the change, particularly in developing countries. It would also address some of the systemic global challenges stemming from the transboundary nature of supply chains and waste streams. So it's incredibly important for business because companies here in the US and around the world really need their governments to set out consistent and effective guidelines that will help them curb the plastic waste and also achieve other sustainability goals like carbon, because it does particularly virgin plastic has a big contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. So we're playing a comprehensive role in ensuring the treaty process begins at UNEA this upcoming February in 2022. And around the world, we're mobilizing support from the general public and companies alike to advocate at the ministerial level.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. And certainly that element of pre-competitive collaboration is something that's a big emphasis within our work and trade groups as well, who I think have a helpful role to play in all of this. Marika, I'd love to turn to you next. So I imagine with Unilever being a global brand, global supply chains, that engagement scale that Sheila's talking about probably resonates with you as well. So I wanted to navigate to your brand perspective and ask how important for Unilever is something like supplier collaboration in particular to a journey like this?
Thank you. Both Sheila and Sander brought up the necessity to build scale and gain speed in the implementation. And I think when you think about Unilever's public commitments that are outlined earlier, our whole entire supply chain is impacted. We cannot do this alone. So all our partners, both upstream and downstream, need to be part of our mission and share the values and goals that we have. Also, a lot of education and capability development is needed within our supply base. How does circular economy work? How do you handle post-consumer resin in your operations? How do you deal with monomaterial, packaging material, etc.? We also, as a brand owner, cannot be solely responsible for building the infrastructure for circular economy. And that's where we also need our suppliers' help in building scalable collection opportunities, scalable and affordable processing technologies, etc. And we have some good examples already in collaboration with our suppliers. We've set up a lot of collection operations in places like India, where the infrastructure typically doesn't exist. Or we've set up chemically recycled resins, CPP, for our Magnum pints together with our supplier Sabic. So quite a bit of that is already going on, but more needs to happen.
And I think that's a perfect transition over to you, Jamie. So you mentioned supplier engagement, really is the core of SupplyShift's area of focus here. What role do you see technology playing in driving the retailer and brand collaboration with suppliers as they're pursuing these plastics goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all back to that question of scale. I think there are a lot of great emerging technologies for alternative plastics, and those need to be scaled and developed more. But if you look at global brands who have made commitments like Unilever, they have hundreds and hundreds of suppliers that are producing goods all over the world. And where to start, right? It's not that difficult to find a good one-off project, right? Hey, I've got a supplier here, I'll try something. But that's not going to really move the needle when the volume of plastic being produced at so many global facilities is so large. So that's where that's why SupplyShift exists, basically, is to help brands and retailers on that journey and help them get visibility and understanding of what is good, right? So, for example, what do companies do on SupplyShift when it comes to plastic? Some of them are looking product by product, SKU by SKU. What's the packaging made of? Is it post-consumer recycled material? Is it recyclable? The components themselves, are they detachable? Can you remove them so you can actually recycle them? If not, that's not good, right? So some companies are rating each product and saying, this one fits my vision of good, or at least my interim vision of good, and this one doesn't. And being able to communicate that really clearly to suppliers, and being able to weight that by the total volume, so you know how much of your volume is on a track towards good and how much is not on a track towards good, and where those suppliers are. That's the basis for everything, right? If you don't have that, then you're just kind of poking in this huge mountain of plastic. You're just kind of poking little holes in it, right? So having that kind of visibility is important. The other thing that companies do related to plastics in this supplier relationship building is capacity, innovation, willingness. If I wanted this, could you supply it? Or do you have an innovation track? Trying to identify suppliers who are willing and excited and open. If you have a pool of those, then you can work with them in a similar way instead of, again, one by one. So it's all about, if you're a company that has 3 suppliers, it's not very difficult to work with them one by one. But when you have hundreds and thousands, it's really literally impossible without getting a broad understanding of what everyone's doing and where they land, and then embedding that educational component along the way. And as push comes to shove, we know that there needs to be other carrots and sticks to help them along the way. So preferred financing is an option that SupplyShift can offer with our partners. If a company is doing well, get preferred financing. So how can we create financial incentives for improvement once we know what we have within our supply chain? So, and then as you see companies doing this over and over again, how does the network effect help that, right? We can't have every company doing different ways of digging in with suppliers. Suppliers go crazy, right? So that's why when all of the topics we cover on SupplyShift, there's a standardized option where we can have quick time to value and move the needle, and obviously dig deeper with more customized ways of assessing suppliers and products.
That's excellent. I know within the Rela membership that scale is the biggest challenge as well. So tools like this are going to be really important going forward. And I'd love to build a theme of technology and really give folks some examples to think about. So Sandra, if you don't mind me coming back to you, I'd love to hear what are some examples of other technology applications that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is excited about in a new plastics economy.
Yeah, technology and innovation are definitely, a part of the solution. And when we talk about innovation, most people immediately think about recycling innovation, new recycling technologies, but that's only part of the solution. And we feel there's an enormous and actually largely underexplored opportunity in upstream innovation. That's about rethinking the packaging. For example, several startups are using food byproducts like orange peels to create an edible coating that can be applied to fruit and vegetables to keep those fresh, just like packaging would, but without the need for packaging. As just one example. And beyond rethinking the packaging, there's rethinking the product itself. This sometimes is just about small changes. I always like, for the simplicity, like the example of Samsung changing the design of their smartphone chargers from a shiny black surface to a matte black surface, make it more scratch resistant, and as such eliminating the need for a plastic protective wrapper around it. But it can also be more substantial changes in products, going from a physical to a digital product, or from a liquid to a solid product like Lush did with soaps and shampoos, or toothpaste that comes in tablets rather than in paste form, so that you don't need the very hard to recycle tubes that toothpaste normally comes in. And even beyond rethinking the product, also daring to kind of rethink the business model or the delivery model around it. SodaStream, for example, is delivering the same type of soft drinks to consumers in a completely different way and with way less packaging. Or there's many examples of a wide variety of different reuse business models out there, and that's what we tried to convey in our Upstream Innovation Guide, that there's a lot of opportunities out there. We gathered 100+ case examples to show that this applies to a very wide variety of products, to high income, low income countries, so widely applicable rather than just a niche solution. And on top of that, while doing that, we identified a lot of next to the environmental benefits, a lot of business benefits, from cutting costs to building brand loyalty to increasing customer experience and being able to kind of tailor more to consumer needs. So a lot of the much needed innovation really sits upstream, as we won't be able to simply recycle our way out of that. So we highly encourage people to really focus a lot of their innovation efforts upstream and innovate in that area.
That's great. And I know the Innovation Guide is something that we've loved spotlighting within RILA's own Retail Innovation Center and our Compliance Center, because we see some of these opportunities as a way to even reduce a company's compliance burdens if you're taking an extra step to take a more sustainable approach to it. So Marika, I'd love to turn to you next. Is Unilever exploring any approaches like these? How do you prioritize these strategies within your overall approach to make sure that you're having the biggest impact that you can?
As one of our commitments is an absolute plastic reduction, we're looking at a lot of new business models like refilleries in retail outlets, where consumers can bring their own bottle and refill their shampoos, body washes, etc. So we've done that in places like Philippines, Indonesia. In Chile, we have a refillery on wheels, where a refillery truck goes from city to city, where people can get their household cleaning liquids, once again, personal care liquids. We're looking at concentrates like Cif household cleaner or even Omo detergent. We're looking at substitutes for plastic, basically paper-based, so paper-based bottles with Pulpex for Omo. We are substituting a lot of ice cream tubs into paper tubs, like with Carte d'Or in Europe. And we're doing refills also in some personal care items like deodorants. So we're trying to really find solutions for less plastic as a whole. In terms of using technology, one of the areas that we want to focus on is certification and traceability. We want to make sure that we can live up to the expectations, and also consumers want transparency more and more in terms of, if you're promising that these products are using post-consumer resin, how can you prove it? So we want to create that transparency. And also we want to use technology in collection and processing. We have an example of an app called Kabadiwala in India, where waste collectors can find, using an app, aggregation points for flexible waste and link themselves to a more formal infrastructure, and hence enabling their livelihoods and tracking of collection in India. So technology and new business models can be used in many ways in different parts of the circularity of plastics.
Excellent. And that takes us back to that global approach too, that some of these markets may be a better place to test certain ideas than others, and really just the theme of experimentation, I think, that'll be central to this. Wonderful. So Unilever has been such an incredible leader in this space, and I'll certainly say a big part of what the RILA communities do is help understand companies' learnings and challenges as peers. Sheila, you mentioned WWF does some work in this space as well that I know is helping companies at different stages in their plastics journey. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, I think I'll touch on what you said about transparency, because I think that's a big and important point. I do think that one of the key points, and I think Jamie got at this as well, is there's a piece to do with measurement and really holding companies accountable for their plastic footprint. So one of the things that we've done has been creating, we've created an overall footprinting model, but we have a platform that we work with companies on called Resource Plastics. And we work with many of the leading big brands like Coca-Cola or McDonald's or Starbucks to help them really understand the footprint. And I think and how we think about that is kind of like, what are all the sources of plastic that you're taking in and the volume, right? So when we're talking about all these ways of reuse or innovations, partly what you're trying to do is shrink the footprint overall. But then the footprint that you do have, what you want to be looking at is what kinds of materials are you using? And there's obviously innovation in the materials, innovation, upstream and not having to use anything, then innovation in the materials that you do use. And I mentioned recycled content, bio-based. And then I think when you're looking at kind of what goes in, you also are then looking at like what kinds of plastics are you creating and putting out in the system. And I think really, really importantly, we talk about the fate of where do your products end up? And in those places, what is the waste, what is the infrastructure to deal with waste, right? Because something can be fully recyclable in one place and in another place, not at all, because it doesn't have the waste management system that can recycle that. And I think what we're trying to do is look at that across all of those pieces to look at that footprint and seeing what companies are doing to improve at each stage. And at the last one, making those contributions into that waste management system that are going to be needed. And then, at a high level, there's kind of this three-pronged approach. So you start with, as I said, the beginning, the first level, reducing those unnecessary plastics. And that's where I think some of the redesign is really important, and just getting rid of things like small plastics that we know end up getting excluded in recycling streams. But they can also look to new business models. And I think we touched on some of those, some of the reuse models, I think that Sander touched on are really terrific examples. But then they can also do things like lightweighting and reducing the overall amount of material that goes into any particular product or unit. So there's kind of elements across where you can drive innovation in just getting rid of the plastics. And then as you look at the second step, it's shifting to those more sustainable sources. And what we're really looking at is, how can we get out of virgin plastics, right? How do we look at getting to some of the post-consumer recycled material? And how do we overcome some of the challenges in the recycling system to get there? I mean, even here in the US, we're not ending up recycling a lot of the material. And there are a number of things because that get in the way, but ideally it should be, if you get to the right scale, it should be more economic to be using the recycled material. We just don't have the scale yet. And there are a number of things that are blocking that, investment in the waste management system being a really key part of it. But there's other alternatives too, bio-based. I think the key there is to ensure that you're using responsibly sourced materials that are going into those, because what you don't want to do is trade off, for example, conversion of some natural habitat to grow the feedstock that could be worse than the virgin plastic that you're replacing. And then finally, I think really critical is going to be for companies to look beyond their own supply chain and look at how they can play a role in improving the recycling and recovery systems. And I think that's that fate question. How do we actually ensure that where our products are ending up, that there is a matching system for the waste management that can ensure that those products get circulated back into use. So I think across all of those areas, we're working. We're working with our resource platform in the US. We're also working together with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, leading the US Plastic Pact, which is mobilizing American companies together and working also on this common vision for circularity. And we're also leading something called One Source Coalition, which is bringing companies together to advocate for public policy in the US and trying to accelerate that transition that we need to see, and mobilizing support for, as we spoke about, the need for extended producer responsibility.
That's helpful. Thank you. And I know among trade groups, there's been a pretty universal interest in, investment in this infrastructure and research and development, so that we're really connecting the end of life streams with going into this recycled content element of it. So that's fantastic. Jamie, I'd love for you to kind of round out the formal moderated portion of this with a little more inspiration. Are there any other favorite examples of companies and their suppliers working together that get you excited about what's to come?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to see all of this, not just in the context of plastic, but companies are working with their suppliers on all kinds of issues: greenhouse gases, palm oil, deforestation, human rights, and some of them are interlinked, right? Just as Sheila said, you could end up with a deforestation problem if you're solving a plastics problem, end up with a human rights problem if you're trying to create some recycling, infrastructure. So there's these things are interrelated, and so I think it's really important for companies to think about their supplier performance engagement on sustainability as a holistic program. And that's what I get really excited about when companies have, just like Sheila said, you've got to understand what the plastic you have, what's you're already producing, right? You have all that laid out. You understand which suppliers are on track, are doing the right thing, have high percentages of the kinds of plastics you want. And then alongside that, you have other information about how suppliers are doing on other areas. And then you see which suppliers really stand out, which suppliers need the most help, which suppliers you're going to really have to work with your procurement team when you do your business reviews to get them on the right track, right? So seeing that all happen at once is, maybe it's a little bit, on the nerdy side of supply chain engagement. It's not the exciting, new types of materials type of thing, but it's the brass tacks stuff that every company is going to have to deal with. What gets me really excited is, for example, on SupplyShift, the Thesis Index, where we have over 2,000 brands and private label manufacturers, including Unilever, including Coca-Cola, including all of the big brands, reporting to their retailer customers, including Walmart, including Ahold, including Kroger, Walgreens, about all kinds of sustainability KPI hotspots, including plastics, right? So there's a score out there on plastics packaging for every product category that Unilever and others produce. It's actively being done, and companies can see how they're doing, how they're performing compared to each other. And that's a big motivator, right? No one wants to be in last place. So having that kind of really, that breadth of information across the industry that retailers can use to make decisions, that brands can use to see how they're doing, that then they can dig deeper. I think that's my nerdy SupplyShift side. That's what gets me excited.
I love it. Thank you. So thank you so much to Jamie and to all of our speakers for giving us a really great number of topics so we can dive into during the Q&A. And I see lots of questions coming in. I wanted to remind folks to please submit your questions via the Q&A box, not the chat. That helps us manage them a little bit better. And I'll pose them to our speakers. But I know our speakers may have spotted some good questions come through already. Is there anyone on the panel who'd like to start with a question they saw come through? Otherwise, I'll start looking through them.
Yeah, I've been browsing through a few, and I'd like to, I guess, make a connection between 4 or 5 different questions I saw, ranging from recyclers not getting sufficient feedstock to recycle, and then brands not getting access to recycled content at a price competitive to virgin plastics, and kind of the lack of collection and sorting infrastructure, and all of this comes down to one major problem that's underlying all of this, and that's the economics of collecting, sorting, and recycling plastics. That whole chain simply don't stack up. So without solving that, this is, we're never going to really scale packaging. And I'm talking packaging in general, not only plastic packaging, but never going to scale packaging recycling without really solving that. And the only proven way to do that is EPR policies. And you don't just have to believe me saying that, but we just launched a statement in June with 150 organizations, including the world's biggest brands and retailers, including WWF, and many other kind of NGOs and other stakeholders, all recognizing that explicitly and signing such a statement calling for rolling out EPR policy across the world. And if you think about it, that's really a major step for those brands and retailers. We're talking $30 billion every year on a global scale that is needed to to scale those systems and on an annual basis, that is, to scale those systems, and the brands and retailers, the ones who will be contributing most of that funding themselves, having them step forward to say, we are willing to do this because we recognize it's the only way to actually solve this problem, is not a decision that's been taken lightly, of course. So that will be really really crucial to see over the coming years. And for me, it's very, very obvious the one, if you just compare EU and the US, for example, like the one single most important reason that recycling rates between those countries is just so big, and that's the EPR policy that has been in place for a long time, because GDP levels and innovation, like all of that's very similar, right? So that's really the main driver there. And we see many people doing a lot of efforts and trying everything they can to kind of improve recycling quality here, sort a bit better there, but all of that is for nothing if we don't really solve that fundamental issue with the system, that the economics don't stack up. And see many people calling like, oh, we lack investors investing in the system. Well, try and find an investor that wants to invest in a system that doesn't make money, right? So that's really, really crucial and often overseen core issue to actually scale recycling infrastructure.
Yes, Sheila.
Yeah, I saw a couple questions, and they are related to this recycling infrastructure. So maybe I'll build on Sander's comments. There's one about how do we improve the economics of plastics recycling? At the moment, there's no incentive for recycled resin over virgin resin. And there's another question about the major limiting steps around recyclability is availability of plastic waste feedstock. But I'll address the first, and I do think that there are a couple answers, right? But EPR is fundamental. One of the things that EPR does is it's creating that sustainable funding stream for the waste management system, right? And definitely in places like in the US, our waste management system is not well funded, and it drives the waste management companies are doing kind of the easiest solutions, which are going to be, well, we don't, we can't recycle this, or there's not the capacity, or what we're getting isn't good enough, so we'll just stick it in landfill, which is what's happening. So I think the EPR plays a huge role in terms of creating consistent funding for the system. It also creates an incentive, right? If the plastic that you use is essentially has a, it's like a tax, right? There's a payment, then there's an incentive to use less plastics. But I would get at kind of some of the limiting factors. I do think, oh, and there's one about like, how do you help this? There's other ways beyond the EPR that could be additional. For example, in the US, we've been looking at investment tax credit that could put some money into the recycling system and be able to boost that capacity, things like landfill tipping fees. So there are some of these kinds of, tax credit or potential subsidy, which is especially important because certainly in the US and many countries, the energy sector, oil and gas, has been subsidized for many years. And so the cost of virgin plastics is kind of unnaturally low relative to the recycled content. On recycled content, there are a number of things that can be done. The plastic feedstocks, a lot of times it has to do with better sorting, and kind of the bales that they're getting in don't have clean enough, plastics. And so I think there's tweaks in the system of the waste management. Again, you need some funding to be able to do that, but there's a huge amount of recyclable content that is ending up in landfills because it's not properly sorted, and then you end up with these contaminated bales where you just can't pull out that high quality plastics. So I think we've got a broken system. It does need that funding to be able to start to fix what we have is not enough capacity really to drive the recycling side of the business. And so we're doing the easy answer, which is sticking things in landfill, at least here in the US. In other countries, it's, some don't even have any waste management. So again, there's this need for the investment. But when you get to scale, there's opportunity for that to be profitable. So one of the things that companies can do is they can do these longer term purchase contracts where they're guaranteeing that they're going to buy that recycled content at a price. And that will enable some of the waste management, the recyclers, to be able to get the financing needed to invest in and drive those better recycling systems. So I think it's a system that we just need to jumpstart it, because it will be more profitable in the long run, and it should make perfect sense. It's very expensive to go drill and take the plastics out of the planet, right? It should be more economical for it to just be circulating in the system, but we need that system change to get to that more economic model.
Yeah, I mean, you could draw a parallel to the solar industry and where the solar industry was 10 or 20 years ago when it didn't make sense to do solar. Why did some people do it? Because there were policies in place in certain places.
Investment tax credits, absolutely.
Exactly.
Solar's exactly the example. And it's that model that we need, at least here in the US, that would make a lot of sense to be able to start to get to the scale that we need on recycling.
Really interesting. I think another theme for the questions that I'm seeing coming in is really about this kind of materials decision-making hierarchy. And I'm wondering if we could turn to you, Marika, for this. What does that process look like for Unilever when you're first assessing, maybe is there a minimization or take back or reuse opportunity? And then as you are looking at different material options, some of the trade-offs that might exist with starting to move to paper-based materials, or where, plastics really is the best performing to protect the product. And then I'll say after that, Jamie, I'd love to turn to you and kind of hear about how SupplyShift helps inform that decision-making.
Thank you. Our focus has been quite heavily on driving mono materials, because that enables recyclability. It also facilitates potential chemical recycling. So that's been the main focus area for us. Of course, we're looking at other materials as well, like biodegradable or compostable materials, but that has not been the priority for us, because there's a little bit of lack of standards and pathways for these materials at the moment. We're not shying away from it, but it's not the primary focus. Wherever possible, we're looking at alternate materials, keeping in mind the overall life cycle analysis of these materials, because we don't want to go from a bad solution to a worse solution. But where appropriate, we are looking at paper-based materials. We are also looking at the refills, like I mentioned, and reuse solutions. So the hierarchy typically is that first we want to make everything recyclable, and then look at alternatives where it's affordable.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And Jamie, what does some of that decision making look like with a SupplyShift tool?
Yeah, so one thing we see companies moving towards more is not just looking at plastic packaging, but packaging across the board. So you can look at those trade-offs. So if I'm looking at each SKU and what's involved in the packaging, I'm not just going to ask about the plastics. I'm going to ask about the glass. I'm going to ask about the paper, cardboard, because there's deforestation issues with paper, obviously. And so there energy with glass, right? So you can look across the board a lot of issues with plastics. I think the Food Management Institute is working on expanded guidance around that. I think what people look to today is how to recycle has really good guidance about what a good package is that's recyclable. We've seen companies take that guidance also in line with their Ellen MacArthur Foundation commitments. And then, with SupplyShift, you can create a rating, right? If it has this, it meets my expectations. If it doesn't, and those things vary, just like Marika is saying, company by company might have, because they produce different things, because they see opportunities, they might look for good in a slightly different place than another company does. But having that ability to have a starting point of what a good plastics package is. Walmart has some great publicly available guidance about plastic packaging and what makes a good package. So starting from that, rating all your products, tweaking based on your company values, there's a lot of progress to be made.
That's great. I saw a couple questions kind of circling back to Marika, your comment about, some different materials or different end of life cases have kind of a scatter shot of standards available, or there's a bit of challenges in uniformity. I'm just wondering if any of our speakers could sort of speak to how that's starting to develop and what some of the terms that folks would want to make sure they're doing that due diligence around understanding full life cycle impacts and really unpacking what that looks like if they're working across different geographies.
I will say that there's a potential to over measure very quickly, right? I mean, looking at the life cycle impact of every piece of the package is not really a good idea, because you're gonna end up measuring all day long and not acting, right? So boiling down to the simple characteristics that define good and focusing on building up more of those, I think is much better than going too deep on the data.
Yeah, and I agree on that, and like to add on that, like it's also important to interpret a life cycle assessment for what it's worth, right? And should be one very valuable input in decision making, but it's not the holy grail giving you the right answer, because if every LCA has, of course, a clearly defined scope, but if you optimize the decisions on life cycle assessment for each and every individual scope or case, it's not necessarily leading you to the best overall impact on a system level, even in an LCA wise best overall impact on the system level. So I think that's important, and links to your previous question on material substitution, on shifting from plastics to paper or to new biodegradable materials, etc. There's no such hierarchy as paper is better than plastics or glass is better than paper. You need to look at it case by case, because it depends on the application, the geography, the system that's built around it, the business models around it. So that obviously doesn't give a simple answer. But what we also try to do in the last chapter of the Upstream Innovation Guide is talk exactly about that, and like how does life cycle assessment fit as one of multiple tools into that decision making, and what are the type of questions to ask yourself while making a choice between two different packaging options or two different materials, again for a specific case by case situation. So it's more about that guidance, and also be driven by the vision and the long-term system you're working towards, rather than there being one simple answer, one simple hierarchy of this is better than this and this is better than this.
Yeah, I would add to that, because I think that's really accurate, is that I come back to also we often are going to look at one measurement, and I think you can end up trading off one thing for another. And because you can be saying, well, paper packaging, but then it's really depending on where it's being sourced from, how responsibly sourced it is. So I do think that the first step is if you cannot use it in the first place, right? And so I think that there is a hierarchy in terms of use less, right? And then there is getting into kind of, well, what do you use for what you use? And that's, I think, the decision making here. I think one of the difficulties, particularly with measurement, is that we don't have great ways to measure that fate, right? So companies first have to figure out where that, as you look at a life cycle assessment, you can say, okay, I can look at the life of the thing and, the creation of the plastics, and I can understand things like where the greenhouse gas emissions are happening, which is, by the way, mostly in the virgin and the creation of the resin. But you have a much harder time getting at where the things are landing and whether or not there's going to be a recycling system and what happens to it, right? Whether it's going to end up in landfill or what have you. And you may look at it and say, well, from a greenhouse gas perspective, it's okay if it goes to landfill, but we know that's not the answer, or if it goes into nature. So I do think that we often don't have those kind of measurement tools that are going to, get at, what is the kind of end result. So I do think that it's kind of a combination of the metrics and how you look at it, and sort of that overall analysis, as Sandra was saying, so that you can take it into account. I do think there's some interesting questions about greenhouse gas and carbon, and I do think that's an important aspect also for companies to be taking into account, because many do have ambitious climate targets and they're busy kind of measuring over here in their plastics while they're measuring over there in their climate, but they're actually not necessarily bringing the two together. And plastics does have a big carbon footprint. So part of why it's so good to be looking at these alternative materials, looking at recycled content, is because you don't have that kind of first step in the plastic process of the virgin resin, which has a significant greenhouse gas footprint. So I'll just say that no matter, like, that piece of the puzzle should be brought in. It is part of that decision-making, part of the numbers, but you have to look holistically, and you have to take that one planet perspective of making sure you're not trading off one kind of environmental problem for another.
Excellent. So I see we're nearing the end of our time. I'd love to turn to each of you just to see if you have any kind of closing comments or words of wisdom for our audience members who are definitely eager to figure out what role they play in this. So maybe I'll go in our initial order and go Sander, Sheila, Marika, and Jamie. Any closing comments for the audience?
Not really. Like, I mean, I guess the next few months will be really crucial on the treaty. As was mentioned, we have actually an important 2-day meeting of ministerial meeting this week. So that will definitely be interesting to follow. And then to Jamie's earlier point on transparency and company performance, the global commitment and its kind of annual reporting cycle, where all of the major companies that are part of the global commitment are reporting their progress. The next report of that's coming out November 15. So that's the most kind of comprehensive and up-to-date data set and transparent data set on what each of these companies are doing in terms of making progress. So I would say definitely keep an eye out for November 15th when that new data set is coming out.
Great, thank you. Sheila?
Yeah, I will echo Sander's words around the global treaty. I think that's obviously something we're very focused on. But I would want to end kind of on a note of optimism. There's a huge amount of work that we need to do to fix what is a broken system. But I think what is encouraging about this issue relative to some of the other really significant global environmental challenges that we face is the amount of momentum, and that momentum is across stakeholders. I think it's really great to see the interest of consumers. We commissioned a study with the Economist Intelligence Unit to look at kind of consumer interest in this issue, and there's huge momentum and interest in consumers in seeing companies solve this and having producers take responsibility. So it's exciting to see when kind of those everything begins to align. We're seeing investors really take this seriously, which is tremendous also. And I think we're seeing a lot of the companies coming forth and really driving a lot of fantastic initiatives. Unilever was here today talking about some of the great work that they're doing. So it gives me excitement because we're kind of in a very positive direction. And this is a challenge that, if we can start to get to that more circular economy and really not have waste getting out into nature, and really having an efficient system, one can start to actually envision how that can happen in the near future. So we need to do a lot more, and we need to work really fast, but this is something that I see moving in the right direction.
Great. And then Marika, Jamie, just a couple sentences from either of you.
Yeah, I would echo the optimism a little bit. There are a lot of solutions out there already for circular economy. We just need to select the ones that are fit for purpose in each of the market based on the technology maturity and infrastructure maturity. And we need our suppliers, our partners to build scalable and affordable solutions with speed to make the circular solutions the norm in plastic packaging in the future.
Great, Jamie.
Yeah, I just agree to a large degree that so many companies have made such bold commitments on plastics that's wonderful. And so now it's action time. And so like any action time, there's ways where you can get lost in, again, like we're talking about LCA measurements and impacts that we haven't anticipated need to be monitored, but we have to focus on tracking towards a goal, right? How am I doing? Where can I improve? And boiling it down to what's actionable. So that's my inspiration is focus on what can be actionable soon and keep an eye on all the other stuff, because we can get lost in the other stuff and not take enough action.
Well said. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to the Reuters events team to close us out.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to all the panelists for taking part of this webinar, and thank you, Erin, for moderating today's session. It was a great session, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions that haven't been answered, but we are going to do our best to get back to you on those. We will be sending you the recordings in a couple of days of this webinar, so you can watch this and share with your team as well. And finally, just remind that this webinar has been built on the run-up to our Responsible Business Summit USA, which is taking place on the 16th to the 18th of November of this year. And you can find more information on the link on the chat below. Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good rest of your day.